It was a tough week for our intrepid hosts as our respective teams went down in flames. It was a tougher week for Matt Rhule. We have our first coach firing. It was a tough week for the Packers as well. A whole lot, that and more as Nick and I recap our top 10 reactions to NFL Week 5. Hey everybody, welcome to RotoWire and the fantasy football podcast that we have here. And we got a lot to cover. As always, our podcast is brought to you by the good folks at No House Advantage. Nick, it was a tough week for us, man. Really tough week. Except for college, you were pretty good. For me, it was just no more the never-ending misery that comes with Northwestern.
Yeah, well, we went head-to-head in college, so one of us had to at least get a victory there. And yeah, I consider myself lucky that it was me and the Wisconsin Badgers because, man, Sunday rolled around, and I think the Packers took pretty easily their worst loss of the Matt LaFleur era. I think if you go by the spread, it was their worst loss in like 5 or 6 years. That was extremely ugly. I was pretty confident coming into this week that they had their letdown last week against the Patriots. It wouldn't happen again. That would be the wake-up call. But, man, I mean, a lot of the same issues from last week, I think, reared their heads once again. And Green Bay, for so long, feels like it's been able to kind of skate by on talent. And, you know, games like this, they can always turn it on and get a score when they need to. But, wow, I mean, a disgusting second half by Aaron Rodgers, who's been really bad for about half of this season. And then, of course, in the noon window, my lock of the week, my survivor pick, the Jaguars. I was so confident. I really thought this was a good team. I was telling you, around this time last week that despite losing to the Eagles, despite Trevor Lawrence turning it over 5 times, I came away encouraged that they only lost that game by 1 score. And man, I've done a complete 180. The Jaguars might be back to being the Jaguars at this point. And I mean, more than anything, a really, really concerning performance by Trevor Lawrence, who is one of the 3 worst quarterbacks in the league. He's lost them single-handedly the last 2 games. And to me, the ship is starting to sail on Trevor Lawrence ever being an ultra elite quarterback. I mean, I'm not saying he can't be a good starter, but I think by now we would have seen some signs. And if anything, it looks like he's now regressing after a pretty encouraging start.
Yeah, so that was the first game I rewatched because I missed the second half of that game and because of soccer duties. So I'm always doing the catch up in there. And of course, there's like 9 games in the early slate. So there's a lot to catch up on. First of all, they outgained the Texans like by about 140 yards. I wasn't as discouraged from Lawrence. He had the one bad end zone interception. There was he was throwing a little high, I thought at times. The very first drive, there was a third down pass that went off the hands of Zay Jones. I thought it was catchable, but later on, there were other ones he was just high on. They didn't convert a 4th and 3. They didn't convert a 4th and 1. They had the fumble. They had, the interception, obviously, in the end zone. I mean, honestly, they had the terrible penalty by Trayvon Walker. I mean, that kept the 1 touchdown drive by the Texans going. Honestly, I was stunned that James Robinson couldn't get on track in this game. 10 for 27. He was like a top 10 back for me this week. I thought it was a perfect get-well game for him. There's no weather conditions whatsoever. I'm not super discouraged. I mean, the defense played well for the Jaguars in this game. I think I think they were just off just a little bit. I'm not as despondent about Lawrence as you are.
Yeah, maybe I need to be a little bit easier on him, but I think you have to take into account the pedigree that we're talking about here. I mean, this is not just this isn't Davis Mills. It's just happy when he plays well. You don't expect him to play all that well. I mean, this is supposed to be the guy. That's the thing, and that's where, to me, I don't really think it is too harsh to say, like, this is somebody that, realistically, a lot of people thought would be in that Mahomes, Herbert, Rodgers, Brady type of trajectory, early in his career. And he's just hasn't shown signs of it. And, it's one thing to kind of be a game manager and maybe not show those crazy elite flashes of the type of throws that you see from Herbert and Mahomes. That's fine. But you can't be out there losing your team games. I mean, that interception in the end zone, that might have been the worst pick that anybody's thrown all year. Jacoby Brissett had one for the Browns this week as well. That probably rivals it. But I mean, that was an unbelievably bad decision. Like you said, he's sailing throws left and right. Just hasn't shown, the signs of elite quarterback play that you'd like to see by now. So, to me, I've watched pretty much every Trevor Lawrence snap over the last year and a quarter. And I just don't see it. I don't see it. It's pretty disappointing. I mean, to me, it reminds me a lot of like the Andrew Wiggins situation in the NBA, where like Andrew Wiggins wasn't bad. Andrew Wiggins won Rookie of the Year. He's been a very good player. He's an NBA champion. He's not the guy that we thought he would be coming out of college. And to me, I kind of feel like, through these first like 20 games or so of Trevor Lawrence's career, like that's the kind of vibes that I'm getting.
Yeah. A rich man's Baker Mayfield.
Well, hopefully it never reaches the depths that we've seen from Baker Mayfield this season, which, yikes, man. I mean, you mentioned Matt Rhule in the intro. He was let go by the Panthers about, an hour or so before we started recording here. Pretty predictable, right? I mean, I don't know if we want to jump all the way to that game, but 37-15 49ers, I think we saw this one coming a mile away.
Yeah, we did. We'll get to that one in a bit. I want to finish up on ripping off the Jacksonville Houston Band-Aid. But the couple things. One of the things is there's not that elite wide receiver. Christian Kirk is pretty good, but he's not one that's going to be, once he's all of a sudden, teams are like, okay, he is the guy. We have to shut him down. He can't beat that. Mm-hmm. Zay Jones is a guy that's freely available for everyone. Basically, he's had his moments. He's going to be a thing in this offense. They don't have a stud tight end. I just don't think they have like that elite crew. It's not like he has Higgins and Chase to work with. And I know we don't have Higgins to work with right now anyhow, right. But again, another aside. I want to preach patience here, but patience does require some more growth. I don't know. I think he was never as great as he was being portrayed after weeks 2 and 3, and he's not as bad as he was yesterday. I think there's somewhere, the truth is somewhere in between, but yeah, you're right. He was really bad yesterday.
Right. Well, the problem is if the truth is that he's kind of a middle of the road quarterback, that still feels like a disappointment relative to expectations. Sure. So I think that's where I'm coming from with that argument. And for this to happen against Houston, that's the thing. I mean, Lawrence aside, I thought I was with you. I thought this was going to be a monster spot for James Robinson. I mean, we've seen teams run all over this Houston defense. And while Lawrence killed them, not being accurate through the air, they could not get anything going, especially with Robinson on the ground. I mean, they did get to like almost 140 yards as a team, but Travis Etienne had a couple of long ones that accounted for the bulk of that total. I mean, Etienne had over half of their rushing yards in this game. 10 carries for 27 yards for James Robinson against the Houston Texans. So to me, like, it's one thing to lose this game, to have a letdown, to look bad on offense if you're the Jags. They've sneakily been terrible on fourth downs too. That they've been very aggressive, and I think they're now like 4 of 11 or 4 for 12 on fourth down. So that's kind of been a sneaky thorn in the side of this offense. But you just can't have this happen at home against Houston. This game against almost any other team, I'd be willing to say, okay, it's a blip on the radar, but man, I mean, this is supposed to be the easy win of all easy wins on the schedule. So to let that one slip, lose a division game while every other team, the Colts and the Titans both win. I was talking myself into like betting Jags to win the AFC South, betting Jags to make the playoffs, doing all that. Like, I've just done a total reversal now after this game. I mean, this was shockingly poor by the Jacksonville offense. You mentioned the Trayvon Walker play, by the way, the penalty. That's as bad as I've seen. I don't know what he was thinking. Some people said, maybe he didn't hear the whistle. Even so, that even if that play had been played out and it wasn't blown dead, I still think you get a personal foul
for body slamming a guy. Yeah.
That was really concerning, I guess, to show a lack of discipline there from a guy who's been off to a good start. But yeah, this really had the feel of the same old Jags type of game. And I really have no other notes. I mean, it was rough.
The Bengals lost to the Jets last year. Just reminding you that.
They did.
They went to the Super Bowl. Okay, it's not early, but it's not late either.
You're right. And the AFC South is forgiving. There's nothing.
You're only a game out in the AFC South.
Exactly.
And you haven't played Tennessee yet.
Yeah.
You have a win in hand against the Colts. The Colts, though, are 0-2-1 in the division, yet they're a half game out in the AFC South. So you're in the right division. So there's that. Speaking of the Colts, let's talk about that atrocity of a game on Thursday night. Oh my gosh! I tweeted out, This is inner circle worst football NFL games ever. I mean, it's way higher down on the list, depending on how you want to phrase it. This was art. It was performance art. It wasn't just bad. It was really bad. And we found out after the fact, okay, Russ is playing with a partially torn labrum in his shoulder. Okay. Might as well disclose that ahead of time, guys. But anyways, there was so many bad things in this game.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we've seen plenty of low scoring games. It's not like this one was all that unique in that regard, but it wasn't a game where, sometimes there'll be a game that's like 9-6 and you come away thinking like, man, that was fun. Those defenses, man, they were both playing so well. Like
Right.
even you think back to like Broncos 49ers from a couple weeks ago, it's like, it wasn't pretty, but it wasn't ugly. It was more of a game where you just felt really good about the defenses. This was not the case at all. I mean, neither defense, I don't even think, played that well. It was just offensive ineptitude after offensive ineptitude. I mean, Matt Ryan was awful in this game. I believe he had 2 more fumbles, pushing his total up to 11 as he lurks closer and closer to shattering that record.
Live look-ins. Let's go.
I cannot wait to keep tracking that as the season goes on. I mean, it was Denver. The thing is, like with Indianapolis, I expected this. Especially you. Not only are you out Jonathan Taylor, but you also lose Nyheim Hines on like the first play of the game. So you're up against it big time at that point. It's acceptable for Indianapolis to have an ugly offensive showing against what we think is a pretty good Broncos defense on the road down 2 weapons. Like I get that, but for Denver, man, I mean, I'm just waiting for this team to snap out of this at some point. And maybe I just need to throw my preseason notion away. Like there's so much talent on this offense and losing Javonte Williams is tough, but I've just been so wrong about Russell Wilson. This is one of my worst calls ever. Like I really thought that the change of scenery would kind of awaken something and he would have this nice little late prime renaissance in Denver. And I mean, I'm just shocked that he seems to be as much of the issue at this point as Nathaniel Hackett, and like, it almost seems like they're like aligned in steering this ship amiss, whereas the rest of the team is standing by like, what are we doing here, guys?
Yeah. I mean, the final play, just as an example, the vision, what isn't there? I mean,
Right.
the decision-making is not there. I mean, the decision that the throw at the end of the regulation, just stunningly bad.
Crazy.
I mean, you're trying to go for style points, for cover points there. And yes, as someone who was on the Broncos, I appreciated their effort from and looking out for me, but my goodness, I mean, that was just a bad throw. I mean, and if you know that you've got a shoulder problem, even if you're not, the rest of the world doesn't. The fact is, you shouldn't be trying that play there. And he's like trying to make throws he can't make right now, and it's tough. You're seeing a lot of chatter out of Seattle, like, yep, we're not surprised by this. I mean, like they're enjoying that right now in Seattle. They have a bad team, but they're enjoying this right now. And maybe they're not even a bad team. They're a middle bad team. But
they might be they're on the short list of the most fun teams to watch.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, Seattle is basically like Geno Smith's West Virginia team back in the day. I mean, he had like an 8 touchdown game in college. People forget about that.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, they've been really fun. The defense is like unbelievably bad. I mean, there's some of the plays that the Saints were able to rip off yesterday were borderline comical, but the Seahawks offense seems pretty legit. You lose Rashad Penny. We just got news this morning that he's done for the year with that broken fibula. That's a big hit, but I mean, we were really concerned. Like I thought coming into the year, for the most part, I avoided DK Metcalf. I avoided Tyler Lockett. I thought that there was a chance that Seattle's passing game could suffer a lot of the same issues that we've seen from Carolina and from Pittsburgh this season. That has not been the case at all. I mean, maybe I've been as wrong about Geno as I have about Russell Wilson.
Agreed. I did a sneaky ads video this morning with Alan, and we talked about Walker's the Captain Obvious pickup, obviously. Not only did he have the 69-yard touchdown, but also, I mean, Penny's gone. They're not going to go DJ Dallas, Travis Homer. They're not going to use those guys on the same way that they split Penny and Walker. Walker's the guy now. He's thrust in this action. Geno's a pickup too, though, in part because this is a ticket to the carnival every single week. You got to love it. And I'm going to be all over that going forward. They get a home game against Arizona this week, and Arizona's not a terrible matchup, but it's also at the same time, it's not one I'm eager to go with, but it's one I will go with. I think Geno Smith might be a top 12 quarterback. That is a take. Top 12 quarterback the rest of the season. He's 4 right now. So obviously he's some room to go down, but I think he's a startable quarterback. And I made a mistake not starting him this week. I did. Well, we'll talk about that when it comes to it there, because let's just say I got a big fat 0 from my second quarterback slot. You guys can figure it out from there. But
was that a Teddy Bridgewater start?
Yeah, it was.
Oh,
it was
boy.
Brutal.
Oh boy.
Brutal. Before we move on, quick note from our friends on Blue Wire. They host all of our podcasts, so we play their ads. All right. Thanks for your indulgence there. Thanks to the Blue Wire Network for hosting our podcast. Let's talk about the London game. Packers and the Giants. My take here, is that the Giants are legitimately the better team. At least they were in the second half. This was not we stopped paying attention. We let them back in the game. The Giants took it to them. They dominated both lines. You mentioned Rodgers had a bad game, but also, I think the Giants figured some things out, and they have no receivers at all. I mean, Darius Slayton actually looked okay, but they found ways to free up Barkley. They found all these other guys. Daniel Jones looked good. Wasn't great in the first half, but he looked really good in the second half. And the Packers couldn't get anything going. They went away from their running game, which I think was a big mistake.
Yet again.
Yeah. Until their final drive. And then all of a sudden they rediscovered Aaron Jones and exists and A.J. Dillon exists, but it's too little too late. I'm dumbfounded at how badly the Packers played, but got to give credit to the Giants. Giants are a well-coached team. I think Dable's got it on a string. I think Mike Kafka is a really good play caller. I like what he's done as an offensive coordinator in his first run as an offensive coordinator. The play calling in this one was exquisite. So many good calls in this game.
Absolutely. And I thought Daniel Jones, given his limitations, both as a quarterback and physically in this game with the ankle, played about as well as he could have. And Green Bay, I mean, this was just another sleepwalking effort by the Packers. I do think they're the better team. I know the Giants are sitting there at 4-1 now. And I think you're spot on about all that coaching analysis. I think the Giants have by far done more with less than any other team in the league so far. I think with a different coaching staff, this team could easily be 1-4 or 0-5, given all the injuries and the lack of talent at receiver. So, I mean, to be 4-1 is a monumental accomplishment. And this is a big time win in what felt like a home game for Green Bay. I mean, London kind of went all out to make this feel like a Packers home game as much as they could. So I don't think that's that much of an excuse for Green Bay. The Packers just have no identity on offense at all. I mean, this was like the third game this year where Matt LaFleur is up there at the podium afterwards saying, well, we got to do a better job staying dedicated to the run. So the Giants go down and tie this game. I think it was at 2020 at one point. And you just had that feeling. I'm sitting there watching it with some family members, and everybody's like, quick 3-and-out coming. We've seen this 100 times. This is the Packers' MO. This is how they lose every playoff game. They get punched. They never, ever punch back. It's a front-running team. And what happens? Aaron Rodgers launches 3 straight incomplete deep shots. Quick 3-and-out. Giants get the ball back, go down, score. Game's basically over at that point. And, they keep saying they want to dedicate themselves to the run. The run is effective. They average, 5 yards a carry with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. And yet, when push comes to shove and you need a score, it's the Randall Cobb raid offense. That's basically what we saw was Aaron Rodgers targeting Randall Cobb as much as he could. I mean, it's really bleak right now. And honestly, like I feel worse about the Packers defense. To me, you talk about doing less with more. There's so much talent on this defense, and they just look discombobulated. They look really, really poorly coached. I saw a stat this morning that the Packers are second in the league in terms of passing yards allowed, second best. So 31st, however you want to phrase that. And yet they have given up by far the most yards of any team on crossing routes alone. So they're just getting killed. Like whenever a defender needs to pass off a receiver to another guy, it's just not happening. And that stat absolutely passes the eye test.
Yeah, the Barkley play. That was a cross, and there was no pass off. It was just boom, gone for 45 yards. He made one tackler miss, but he also got a 20-yard run before he faced a defender. I mean, it was remarkable how wide open it was. And it's the prime guy. How do you lose Barkley? How do you pass off Barkley and not have that all lined up on a string? In the first half, they had Barkley bottled up. They tried to run a screenplay to Barkley, and all that meant was it's just a slower developing play to Barkley because that's all they were counting on. Darius Slayton stepped up for the Giants. I got to give him a little bit of credit. That was a big aspect of this game. I really do think that they needed anyone to step up in the receiving game, and Slayton did. This is not a guy that is not the first guy coming around either. Richie James, whatever. David Sills, okay, he make nice little player. Bellinger had that run. All these are nice things. Slayton's actually a player, and I think he's the one guy that played yesterday in the receiving core for the Giants that's got some staying power. They're eventually going to get Tony back. I don't know about Galladay. I don't know what they can expect from them. Wan'Dale Robinson we haven't seen yet, but someday we'll see something from him. I think that's your trio. I think that, but I think Slayton I think he earned himself some staying power in this offense.
I think so too. 6 for 79 on 7 targets. He was the guy that Daniel Jones was looking for when they needed to convert. And coming into this game, Green Bay had not allowed a third down conversion on third and 8 or longer And I mean, I don't know how many they allowed in this game. It was at least 3 or 4. I mean, the Giants were converting third downs at an alarming rate in that second half. But I mean, it's just astounding to look at the names in this receiving core and see this team put up 27 points. I mean, it's what, I mean, obviously the Packers need to score more than 22, but I think allowing 27 to this team with Daniel Jones on a bum ankle. And, I actually thought they contained Saquon Barkley pretty well. Other than the long 40-yarder, there wasn't a ton of running room for Saquon. But yeah, I mean, this Packers team, it reeks of a team that I think thinks of itself as being significantly better than it is. And I'm really not sure where the season goes from here. I think they still make the playoffs, but you got to start questioning the ceiling.
Yeah, I think you do a little bit there. So your Jaguars lost. Your kind of sort of Packers lost. My Bengals lost. Third loss by a field goal this year. They could easily be 5-0. They are not. They are 2-3. The good news is they're in the right division. I mean, the Ravens are 3-2. We have a 1-game lead, and the head-to-head now. Mm-hmm. Bengals have lost 2 in the division, and that's not great. But I don't think it's all is lost here. T. Higgins was a big 0.0. It turns out that ankle was worse than they alluded to. He rolled it in game. He did get 10 snaps, so it wasn't like he wasn't on the field at all. Just didn't seem like it. No targets. Mixon actually ran a little bit better. They had the big drive at the end of the game. I think this was one of those coulda, shoulda, woulda games. I mean, they had the fourth. It was their turn to have a fourth down goal line situation. It didn't work out. They ran that silly little Pat Mahomes play.
So unnecessary. I mean, they had a 1st and 2 at the Baltimore 2-yard line.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it was an incomplete pass, a sack
of Tyler Boyd.
Yes. Yeah, right. Yeah. And then, they get it back to the 2-yard line, had that kind of slant to Chase. Yep. Looks like he almost gets in. And then, I don't know, Stanley Morgan shovel pass on 4th and goal, man. I get the same vibes watching the Bengals as I do watching the Chargers. It's like Zach Taylor and Brandon Staley make a lot of the same, just like, what are you thinking type of decisions. And in a lot of ways, it kind of feels like they're holding back super, super talented teams. And, it was nice to get Joe Mixon going in this game. Mm-hmm. Like you said, I mean, finally had a reasonable yards per carry average, but I don't know. It just feels like, that the Cincinnati offense should be so much more explosive, and not having T. Higgins is big. I don't think we can understate that, but
right.
Yeah, it just, this was like the worst pass secondary in the league coming into tonight. And I just feel like Cincinnati didn't really attempt to exploit it as much as it should have.
Yeah. Well, I think that secondary is better than, I think they had that Miami game that skews everything.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't think they're really that bad. They played a lot of zone, and, Bengals, I mean, when you're losing one of your big advantages, it hurts. Hayden Hurst looked pretty good. He was a pretty decent option. Kind of disappointed we didn't see more of Boyd in the passing game, actually. Right. But the other thing that was a killer was that interception by Burrow right after the Bengals stopped the Ravens on 4th down.
Yeah.
Again, see also the zone defense. Burrow didn't see the guy, and that took away a lot of the slants, which is that's tough. I actually thought the offensive line played pretty well for the Bengals. 3-20. There's 3 sacks and I think they got to Burrow early, but after those first 3 or 4 series, I think the Bengals offense was actually pretty steady. This was just a good divisional game. I don't think it was as bad as people were making it out to be. And I'm not really that discouraged. I'm not upset that they didn't take more time to score the touchdown. When you have a touchdown, it's never a given. I mean, how many times have we seen teams fail from the 1 or 2, including the Bengals earlier? So the fact that they scored right after the 2-minute warning, I tweeted this out. They have a decade of time, and they do have Justin Tucker, but I don't see any other way for the Bengals. I wasn't upset about that. They couldn't get the stop when they needed it, and Justin Tucker is a god.
Right. And I saw you tweeting about the decision, to score at that certain time. I'm with you on that. I think you just got to punch it in, especially coming off of a goal line trip that you couldn't punch it. I think at that point, it's just get the points on the board. Right. We'll deal with it after that. I mean, defensively too, I actually thought, Lamar Jackson played easily his worst game of the year. He looked good early on, and then he missed like 3 straight throws, had that interception where he just completely overthrew Demarcus Robinson. And from there, you kind of didn't really feel like they had that same type of energy that they had come out with. So I didn't really hate the idea of saying like, look, I think we could prevent these guys. They're going to be starting deep in their own territory. Like we could get a stop here. Like I think it was reasonable to expect the Cincinnati defense to at least put up a bigger fight than they did. But man, it felt like, on that last drive, and it seems like it always goes like this, right? Like the Ravens had struggled to move the ball the entire second half. And then all of a sudden when they need to, it's Mark Andrews for 12 yards, Mark Andrews for 15 yards. All of a sudden you're at the 45-yard line and it feels like the game's over.
Yeah.
But I didn't fault the decision-making at all. I'm still, the Bengals are the team that I will not quit this year. There's just too much talent for them to be sitting at 2-3. I think they've had an unlucky start, but they need to make some hay over these next couple of weeks because their schedule at the end of the season picks up and becomes really difficult. But, next few weeks here, you get the Saints, the Falcons, the Browns, the Panthers, the Steelers, and the Titans. All those very winnable games. Maybe you can't expect to go 6-0, but I mean, you should have a pretty good chance to go 5-1 there.
Yeah, I'm not too despondent actually. This is it. It was one that we gave away. These are opportunities lost. You can't get them back, but it's also not over. And as we learned, you just got to get in the tournament. And that's the whole goal here. So there's still plenty of time. The expanded playoffs help with that a little bit too. I'm not despondent yet, but we will come back. We will look back and regret this loss. I think we'll regret the Steelers loss way more though. I mean, that one's like, that's looking pretty rough. So let's talk about the Steelers actually. Let's talk about the Steelers and the Bills. This one was over early. I mean, the Bills jumped them 35-3 at halftime. They got them early at the first touchdown pass. I mean, Josh Allen went nuts. Gabe Davis, the 98-yarder on the first drive. I mean, if you started Gabe Davis, you're like, all right, I'm going to win this week after one drive. And that always feels good.
Yeah, for sure. And I have Gabe Davis in 2 leagues. So it was kind of nice to be getting those notifications. Like Gabe Davis is in the red zone. It felt like it was coming up like, every 3 minutes in that first half. I talked about this game with John McKechnie on the sports betting pod last week. And, we were trying to talk scenarios like, is there a way that Kenny Pickett, comes out and, looks better than we expect, and Buffalo has a bit of a letdown and, maybe they keep this close for a half. I mean, that was out the window as soon as that 98-yarder went off the board for Gabe Davis. And honestly, this could have been a lot worse. I mean, there were a couple drives in that first quarter for Buffalo that stalled out, after the long touchdown. It kind of felt like they were knocking on the door for some more points. And then, of course, they called off the dogs in the second half, only scoring 7 points, no touchdowns at all in the third quarter. But yeah, I mean, this was a full-on decimation. But for Kenny Pickett, I mean, got to 52 attempts. If you did throw him in there and, in like a super flex league as your second quarterback, you threw the pick, you didn't get in the end zone, but 327 yards on 34 of 52. So even though this was a beatdown, if you're a Steelers fan, like, at least George Pickens, 6 for 83, Deontay Johnson, 5 for 60, Chase Claypool, 5 for 50. This is really the first time all year that even 2 Pittsburgh receivers have been viable in the same game, let alone all 3 of those guys putting up decent numbers.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Claypool kind of viable, 5 for 50. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, and the running game did 0 zilch nada. But then again, right. See also down 35-3 at halftime. So whatever. But yeah, are you concerned if you are Najee Harris manager right now?
I am pretty concerned. And yeah, I have him in one important league. It hasn't been great. I mean, he's one of those guys that, based on the level of investment, it's just hard to find a better option who you feel good about. In that league, I happen to have Rashad Penny, and now that's off the table. So I'm not going to have much of a choice but to start Najee Harris most weeks. And I think, right now in standard leagues, I mean, he's barely inside the top 30 in PPR. He doesn't rank a whole lot higher. He's at 27th. Through 5 games. I mean, it hasn't been good. I think the rest of the way, you kind of have to hope for, I don't think he might not have a 100-yard game the rest of the way. I think that's conceivable, but you need to hope for one of those like 15 carries, 75 yards, 3 or 4 catches, and then he finds his way into the end zone on like a 2-yard touchdown. Like, I just think it's going to be a really frustrating slog the rest of the way.
They get Tampa Bay next week too. So,
oh no.
Yeah, at least it's in Pittsburgh, but yeah, this is baptism by fire. And in fact, I think if I recall correctly, like the next 3 games are all pretty tough defenses for Pittsburgh. So it doesn't get a whole lot easier. In fact, I will tell you, it's Miami, okay, Eagles, and then Saints, and then Bengals again. So yeah, it could be worse, but Tampa this week is a tough one there, and it doesn't get worse than the Bills, obviously. On the Buffalo side, obviously Gabe Davis, his ankle's fine now. So good to see. With no Crowder, no McKenzie, no Jake Kumaro, No Dawson Knox. Khalil Shakir played a part in this game. 3 for 75 and a touchdown. I do think he's got an opportunity to make himself a regular part of this offense going forward. They drafted him with some expectations that he could contribute. I know there's some people on the Devi Dynasty side that were pretty excited about Shakir.
Yeah, you were on this last week. I think we talked about it a little bit with Allen, but you brought him up multiple times as somebody to kind of target under the radar, and that paid off handsomely. 3 for 75 and the touchdown on only 5 targets. We'll see, how much time Isaiah McKenzie misses. I think, Shakir's viability, at least in the short term, is tethered pretty closely to Isaiah McKenzie, but he looked really good. I thought he looked great, and Josh Allen certainly looked comfortable targeting him. I need to make a point to mention the second touchdown by Gabe Davis, by the way, ripping that one away from Minka Fitzpatrick. That was an insane play. It looked like Fitzpatrick kind of had the better grip on the ball to maybe rip that away. And I mean, that was one of the more unique touchdowns I can remember. I mean, he truly did not really realize what was going to happen there, whether it was going to be a pick or a touchdown until the last moment. And Davis was just so casual about it. There wasn't like a scrum for the ball. It was just kind of at the last moment, like, I'm going to grab this from you now, and we're going to get the touchdown.
Right. And the first touchdown, it was a one-handed catch too. I mean, yeah. He was putting on a show, and he only needed 3, but that was plenty for that game, man. And for Minka Fitzpatrick, who's such a ball hawk, to lose that battle was pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, not many receivers in the league, I think, that could pull that off in the way that Gabe Davis is. But yeah, good to have him back. He banged up a little bit, had the big week 1, starting to pay off for those of us who invested.
Yeah. By the way, 31-3 at halftime, not 35-3. I misspoke there. Or misadded, as the case may be, miscalculated. James Cook with the late touchdown, 4 for 31. Nice to see him get some action, even though it was garbage time.
It was, but yeah, nice run by him. I mean, 24-yard scamper, pulled away from everybody. I think that's the type of impact you're hoping to see from him. Like you said, garbage time, game's essentially over. Had a couple of late scrums in this game. It was getting a little bit chippy. Kenny Pickett took exception to a hit from I think it was Lawson late in the game. That kind of set some people off. I think somebody got ejected from this game at one point as well. So it did get a little bit ugly at the end, but like you said, James Cook, who I think landed in like the mini doghouse early on by fumbling on his first NFL carry. But I do think as the year progresses, he's going to have more and more of a role. And he was at least getting the nod over Zach Moss late in the game.
Yeah, it was interesting. Singletary had like an 85% snap share last week. Didn't have that this week. But then again, I feel like this is such an anomalous game in terms of some of the usage stats that it's not that bankable. Yeah. Before we move on to Chargers and Browns, quick note from our friends at No House Advantage. No House Advantage is changing the game by offering the most dynamic fantasy sports platform available today. Play in pick'em contests versus other people for the shot at winning big cash prizes. Download the app, choose a contest, select your player props, earn points for correct picks, and climb the leaderboard for your shot at hundreds of thousands of dollars every week. You can also test your skills versus the house and 20 times your entry if you hit all your picks. Bet on up to 5 player prop over-unders or individual player matchups across every major sports league, including NFL, NBA, MLB, PGA, MMA, and NASCAR. Sign up now with promo code NHAWIRE. That's NHAWIRE at nohouseadvantage.com, or download the app on the app stores to get a first deposit match up to $25. Make sure to check out No House Advantage today and experience daily fantasy sports redefined, because it's not just how you play, but also where you play. You won't want to miss out on this. Big thanks to No House Advantage for sponsoring us all football season long. The Chargers had a big comeback. They acted against DNA, Nick, and they came back to beat the Browns 30-28. Well, then again, the Browns also have copious DNA as far as that goes.
I mean, the Browns absolutely missed huge opportunities to put this game away, like 4 separate times. And I mean, the Chargers tried to hand it to them one last time in the fourth quarter, going for it on a 4th and 1 from their own 46. And, despite the Browns getting the ball back in their territory there, they end up losing a yard and setting up a longer field goal for Cade York, who pushes a 54-yarder. Not a great day for Cade York. That's for sure. Missed another field goal just before halftime. And that one, at the time even, felt like kind of a killer for Cleveland, which had already blown that early 14-0 lead. I mean, this in a lot of ways was kind of a junior version of last year's. I think it was 45-42 game between these two teams in week 5. You just felt like neither team could stop the other. And, I mentioned at the top when we were talking about Lawrence, Jacoby Brissett, man, an absolute killer interception late in this game with under 3 minutes to play. Third down, I think it was 3rd and 7, but it was basically 3rd and goal at that point. And, you're down 2. All you need to do is make sure you don't have a turnover. You take the easy field goal. You're at least up 1. You're not guaranteed to win at that point. Still plenty of time for the Chargers, but you at least take the lead. And he just throws an unconscionable interception, which at the time felt like the end of it. And, of course, the Chargers, find a way to give the ball back to Cleveland. I mean, Jacoby Brissett has 3 interceptions on the year, and all 3 have essentially lost the game for Cleveland. 2 of the 3 have for sure lost the game. One of them was a little bit more of a Hail Mary type of throw, but all 3 picks have come, under 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter of a 1-score game.
Yep. Brutal. And we knew Brissett was going to be a problem for this Cleveland team, which has a good roster. We keep on beating that drum, banging that drum. It's a good roster. Defense wasn't as strong as I thought they'd be. In fact, their run defense is hideous, which surprises me how bad it is, actually. Eckler went off. Not that it's any shame for Eckler to go off against you, but they allowed a 71-yard touchdown run, 16 for 173. Even if you take away the 71-yard touchdown, it's still 15 for 100. I mean, it's still getting gashed. Joshua Kelly, who Alan mentions in our sneaky ads video, went 10 for 49 as the pivot. Is their change of pace guy. He's pretty firmly established now as the number 2. Sony Michel got 1 carry, did nothing with it, and just be gone with that. Don't it's just that you're only complicating matters when you use him. You're only lessening your chances when you go to your 3rd string guy. This isn't a guy that's just aching to play. But anyhow, Eckler has gotten on track the last 2 weeks after we complained so much about him after week 3. All's well in Ecklerville.
Yeah, back-to-back huge games for Austin Eckler, and I did not see this one coming. I think last week against the Texans, that made sense. That's a big bounce-back spot, but I think if anything, I thought Cleveland would kind of decimate this LA rushing defense, and they did. I mean, 31 for 213. I thought Cleveland got a little too pass-happy in the second half of this game for unknown reasons. I mean, Jacoby Brissett should not attempt the same number of passes as Justin Herbert in a game like this. I think that was a huge mistake by Kevin Stefanski, getting away from Nick Chubb, who only had 17 carries in this game. He was running the ball really, really well. And Cleveland, for whatever reason, just fell in love with trying to push the ball downfield to guys like Amari Cooper and Donovan Peoples-Jones. But yeah, I mean, I think at this point, Eckler, I would consider maybe selling high after these back-to-back big games, because I mean, maybe some of this is on the Cleveland defense, but the Chargers were the worst running team in the league through the first 3 weeks. And it's possible that they found something, but to me, that seems a little unlikely. Like the offensive line is still banged up. I think maybe they just got a couple of fortuitous matchups here. And I think we could look back as this maybe being the peak of Austin Eckler's season as far as what he's doing on the ground. I mean, as a pass catcher, still fine. And the other thing is, I guess, how many running backs do you feel better about rostering than Austin Eckler?
Well, that's just the point.
Probably not that many, right? So, if you're trading him, I don't know who you're getting back. But my point overall is I don't think this is quite sustainable because this is not who the Chargers have been, early on in the season, at least.
Yeah, that's just the problem, though. It's you're right. It's unsustainable, but what are you going to get for him? He's your first round pick, so you're expecting games like this from time to time, at least. It's just a little bit more steadiness, I think, is what we're expecting. Our friend Bob Long, he always goes for consistency rankings, and Eckler wouldn't fare well in that. But at the same time, he does have the pass catching floor typically. And
he is the number 1 back in PPR right now. So maybe I should just take this off the table. I mean, you're probably not trading that guy at this point.
And because the fact is you need it. And, running backs are starting to fall by the wayside. The thing is, you would have to be getting your own fantasy equivalent of the Herschel Walker package, basically. You have to be funny how he's known for other things now. But he is, you're going for the whole, like, okay, I'm getting a starting running back and a starting receiver. And, that and not just starting, but like every week starter, very good players. That's how it'd have to be structured, and that's hard to pull off. It just doesn't happen in fantasy leagues that often. Might as well try. You'll see it, but I think it'd take just a mint there. Anything else from this game before we move on to the next one?
The only note I have is that Nick Chubb is up to 593 yards on the season, very quietly, and it is 17-game season, but quietly on pace to just eclipse 2,000 yards. So, we'll be keeping an eye on the Matt Ryan fumbles record. We'll also be tracking Nick Chubb, quest for 2,000 yards.
He went in the 4th round in some of these NFFC leagues late. Just there's a lot that, I can't take Nick Chubb because he doesn't catch passes. And it's true. He still doesn't catch passes that much. Had one target yesterday, but that's the other thing that's still annoying. I get annoyed every time I see Kareem Hunt, especially in the red zone. And he's there in the red zone a lot. I'm just like, ugh.
I know. Well, even on that last drive, after Cleveland gets the stop on that 4th down play by Brandon Staley, all you're thinking at that point is, all right, we just need to get some yards here. They did complete one pass to Amari Cooper to get a 1st down and get inside the 40. But at that point, you're like, all right, we need 5 more yards. Let's make this an easy field goal attempt, try to keep it under 50. It ended up being a 54-yarder, which, it's you feel better about it now. It feels like there are more kickers capable of hitting those, but by no means a guarantee. Obviously, he missed it. And 1st and 10 from the Chargers 35, the Browns opt to run the ball, which for one, they had no timeouts left, but I get it. You're a running team. Why is it Kareem Hunt running the ball for a loss of 1 yard on that play? I mean, that kind of killed all the momentum that they had. I don't understand how it's not Chubb in that spot.
I agree. I guess they just didn't want to look like they're one-dimensional, I guess.
Yeah,
but...
I suppose.
All right. By the way, Browns host the Pats next week, and Ramondre Stevenson might be getting all the carries. That seems like something I'd be interested in. Bears, Vikings, 29-22 Vikes. They jumped on the Bears early, and then they had to hang on for dear life late, getting the late score there. Now, kind of a weird game. Bears actually showed some signs of life.
Yeah.
They actually were winning in the 4th quarter. But then the Vikes went down and scored again. It made it look like all was well again. But, couple things. Justin Jefferson lost a touchdown on a review. Rolled it back, and Cook got it instead. That said, you got 12 for 154 out of Jefferson. Plus, he completed a pass. So make sure you get the yard credit for that as well. You're doing just fine if you drafted Jefferson. That's my point. But Dalvin Cook, your guy, pretty big day for him.
Yeah, nice day for Dalvin Cook. He's quietly, hanging around like RB12, RB13, depending on your scoring system right now. 18 for 94 and 2 touchdowns. Obviously, he's been banged up. Kind of feels like he's always banged up, but has played through it thus far. Jefferson right now, he's like a distant 3rd behind Cooper Kupp because he's just outpacing everybody at receiver. But Kupp, Diggs, Jefferson, I think you're thrilled with either of those 3 guys. Starting to get a little concerned about Jamar Chase. I do think he'll make up ground as the season goes along. But, as of right now, if you were deciding between Jefferson and Chase, as a lot of people were, it's looking pretty clearly like Jefferson is the guy. And like you said, if that touchdown stands, and it was a 50-50 call,
it's a monster day.
Yeah. He's sitting as the wide receiver too. That would have jumped him ahead of Stephon Diggs. Not a ton of other takeaways for me in this game. The Bears had a chance late to tie this game. A pretty huge fumble by Amir Smith-Marset, just completely ripped away by Cam Dantzler. More of a nice play by Dantzler. And then the Bears also had another touchdown wiped out. Justin Fields had a long, I think it was 40-plus yard run. And the same guy, Smith-Marset, had a bad block in the back that was kind of away from the play to negate that one. So, we make fun of Justin Fields a lot at RotoWire, but this was pretty easily his best game of the year. And if that other rushing touchdown isn't wiped out, his running line looks something like 9 for 90 with a touchdown.
Yep, exactly. Still 8 for 47 through 15 of 21. Very proficient effort. It maybe not like a huge amount, but he was very efficient with his chances.
Yep.
No interceptions. Did get sacked twice. Would like to avoid that. He put the ball on the ground twice, but they didn't lose either single one of them. So that was better at least. David Montgomery came back. So much for working him in gently. He was 12 for 20. For the touchdown, but also had 4 catches for 62 yards. Khalil Herbert barely saw the field. And after the monster game he had against the Texans and a pretty decent game against the Giants last week, I'm kind of disappointed that he didn't get the ball a little bit more often.
Yeah, only 14 snaps in this game out of 50 compared to 36 for Montgomery. And yeah, even Montgomery, ran more routes. Obviously, like it wasn't like Herbert was in there, in specific situations. They just, like you said, they just completely got away from him. And Montgomery ran fine in this game. The yardage doesn't look great, but I still think he's pretty dynamic. But Herbert, I mean, he showed some legit explosion over these last couple of weeks. So yeah, I'm a little surprised as well. Not that I expected it to be like a 50-50, but for him to be almost completely phased out a week later was pretty surprising for me. Where do you come in before we move on? Where do you come in on Minnesota right now? They're 4-1, but they barely squeak by the Saints. They barely squeak by the Lions. They do have the feather in their cap beating Green Bay week 1, but I don't even know if that means all that much. And this was not a convincing win by any means. Like I think if there's one saving grace for the Packers, you're really feeling down about how that game went, but the Vikings nearly blew a game to the Bears, and the Buccaneers very nearly blew a game to the Atlanta Falcons. So it feels like a lot of the teams that you're competing against in the NFC are kind of all on that same level right now.
Well, you always hear the phrase, they all get paid on Sundays. So, it's not like they're facing Northwestern or anything like that. They're facing, stars from players that were stars in college too.
Exactly.
I think the Vikings are, they ran into a buzzsaw in Philly. But at the same time in a Monday night game too, prime time. I think don't give Kirk Cousins an island game and he'll do fine. But at the same time, they're one of those teams that they do better when I don't expect a lot out of them. When when I do expect something out of them, they let us down. They're disappointing. So I don't know. I think they're a better than average team, and they're trying to work out their own DNA issues. It's almost like every team has problems like that, but they face Miami this week on the road. That'll be an interesting game. I think they're a better than average team. I'll leave it at that.
I think so too. I think they win that division, and ultimately they only have one more island game the rest of the year, so that bodes well.
It does. If I recall correctly, they have like 3 games outdoors all year too, which is pretty wild. Adam Thielen went 4 for 27 after some big games previously. Chris asks, would you rather have Thielen or Brian Robinson, and why? I'm going to go Robinson. I think that trying to find a guy that features as the running back for a team is harder to find. I think he had 9 out of the Commanders' 12 carries yesterday. They want to make him a thing. Whereas I think Thielen's going to have his moments. I guess a lot of it depends on team needs. That's always the easy answer to say. But I think it's harder to find the running back that's going to be the guy. So I would say Robinson. What say you?
Yeah, I have Thielen in a league where I'm really kind of depending on him to be that third receiver, and I can tell you what, I don't feel great about it. So maybe that's the tiebreaker there. I think you're right. It's tougher to find that guy who has the potential to be the number one option, and for Brian Robinson to come back in and win the carry load in his first game, I think is extremely encouraging. Right? I think even just looking at the snaps, pretty equal split between McKissick, Gibson, and Robinson, and only one of those guys, was shot a few weeks ago, and is now coming back to split those carries. Like you would imagine that as Robinson settles in and builds back up, that workload could shift in his favor. I guess the question for me is just like, do we trust this Commanders offense whatsoever at this point? Not that Minnesota's exactly been lighting it up, but man, this is, we're kind of close to Steelers territory with the way that Carson Wentz is playing. He's piling up yards, but man, just not a lot of faith in this offense actually, capitalizing on those drives. And the running game has been, it hasn't really mattered who the back is. Like the running game has been a major issue for the Commanders.
It has, but it shouldn't be. I still don't know what the heck Antonio Gibson did wrong. He was awesome in week 1.
Yep. And
they kind of just went away from it after that. They stopped running like the routes that were working so well. I don't know. I just think maybe there's other stuff I'm missing. I know he's put the ball on the ground in the past, but he hasn't been doing that this year. I don't know. They're bottom 5 right now in rushing. The yards per carry hasn't really been there either. They only have 2 rushing touchdowns on the entire year. Yeah. There's some teams that are in the double digits already in that category. So, maybe that comes around as the season goes on. But yeah, just that running game overall, Robinson aside, it hasn't exactly been a team that you necessarily want a share of. Yeah, let's talk about that game. Let's talk about their home loss to the Titans. The game I probably watched the least of in the early slate. I don't know. It just too many guys that they're just not that interesting. But you mentioned that Wentz piled on the yards. He got sacked 3 times, had a pick. They weren't running the ball well, 17 for 43. Robinson had 9 carries. Wentz had 5. It just, I know they were missing, they got Diami Brown, who actually had 2 big plays, 2 touchdowns, one that 75-yarder that was really sweet. He was impressive. It's stepping in place of, sorry, spacing for a second. Dotson.
Dotson.
Yeah. So Brown, we don't know if he's going to stick. I don't know if I go out of my way to go get him, but he was someone that was interesting when he got drafted last year.
Yeah, right. It's not like he came completely out of nowhere, but to me, this is a bit of an anomaly type of performance. And, we'll see what the situation is with Jahan Dotson, but only 20 snaps in this game. Did run a route on 16 of those 20, but, 3 targets, 2 touchdowns. To me, that kind of reeks of unsustainability, but he has the big playability that this team needs. And, both of those touchdowns in some ways kind of felt like almost desperation-y type of throws, and they were nice throws by Carson Wentz. But I mean, other than those two long touchdowns, one went for 30, one went for 75. I mean, Commanders did absolutely nothing on offense. Other than that, I mean, it was 3 and out after 3 and out after 3 and out after 3 and out
against Tennessee.
Yeah, against Tennessee. And then, of course, at the end of the game, they put together an 18-play drive, get all the way down essentially to the goal line. You got a 1st and goal at the 2. All you need to do is punch it in and you win the game. And how does it end? Carson Wentz picked off in the end zone. I mean, it was a predictable end. That's for sure.
Yep. Yeah, it sure was. Not much else to say on the Washington side of things. How about Tennessee?
No. Well, we saw Nick Westbrook-Akina, have a long catch and run in this game. Not a massive day for Robert Woods with Treylon Burks out. This was, a really ugly game. We saw Dontrell Hilliard get in the end zone again. But these are the games that Tennessee kind of thrives in, right? I mean, they're okay winning 21-17 against the Commanders. And for a lot of the day, these teams looked equally bad. But when it comes down to it, you just trust Tennessee more than you do the Commanders. Obviously you'd rather be the team that has the ball at the 2-yard line with a chance to win. But you're sitting there watching the Commanders, and I'm like, there's no way they're getting this in. There's just no way, because you trust the Titans to be the smarter team, to be the better coach team, to be in better positions. And that's how they've won 3 in a row now. They're sitting at 3-2. They're back on top in the AFC South. Fantasy wise, that receiving core is going to continue to just be, I think, pretty dry week to week. That there's going to be some weeks where Robert Woods, is viable, but on the whole, probably not. Derrick Henry, though, very quietly, RB3 in standard leagues, in PPR leagues, he is RB5 right now through 5 games, and right on the heels of Christian McCaffrey. So a little bit of initial panic through those first 2 games for Derrick Henry, but here we are, and he's on track to probably returning first-round value.
Yeah, and granted, RB production has been down across the board, but he's really kind of revived himself the last few weeks, and after a really, really slow start, a lot of that was, we saw the Buffalo game and how that got out of hand. So of course he didn't have that opportunity to do what Derrick Henry does best, and that's like wear down opposing defenses. You didn't get that attrition factor that works in their favor. So
yeah, well, to put it in context, like last year through 5 weeks, Derrick Henry had 42 more fantasy points at this point in the season than he does now.
Yeah, and he was having a great season, by the way, too. He was dominating before he got hurt, and then I was taking L's left and right because I was fading him last year, and then he got hurt. So that was brutal. All right, let's take a quick note from our friends at Play with Swagger. There are 50 million fantasy sports players and sports bettors in the U.S., but 90% of all cash prizes are won by only 2% of all players. That's because most sports gaming options were created for pros. The dudes dropping loads of cash on data to find an edge over the rest of us. Not Swagger. Swagger is a daily fantasy sports site created for sports fans who simply want some skin in the game and a real shot at winning. Tired of losing because of one bad pick? With Swagger, you don't need to be perfect to win. You simply create a ticket of 4 to 10 simple player props and score points for the ones you get right. Your score determines your win, not the perfect ticket. You can be half right and be all right with Swagger. Swagger offers the most player props and biggest payouts of any DFS site, as much as 50 times your money. Plus, you can play fantasy football along with the major U.S. pro sports, as well as international soccer, Formula One, NASCAR, fight sports, rugby, cricket, and even esports. Ready to play? Visit playwithswagger.com/RotoWire to sign up, and Swagger will give you $10 free to try them out, plus match your first deposit 100% up to $100. Swagger, Daily fantasy for all fankind. Let's talk Lions and Patriots. Get it done and over with here, Nick. The Lions, they were the leading scoring offense in the NFL and the worst scoring defense in the NFL going into this game. They are no longer the leading scoring offense in the NFL. They got shut out. It strikes me like a lot like, reminds me of like when the Chargers 2 years running ran Herbert into the Pats and, they ran roughshod over him.
Yeah, this one felt kind of predictable. It was one of those lines that, even though Detroit was coming off of a loss, even though these teams had the same record coming in, one team is on its third quarterback in Bailey Zappi, and the other team is putting up points left and right. So you're thinking, man, is Detroit's really coming in as like definitive underdogs against this New England team? Yeah. And we saw why early on. I mean, this was one of the things that we talked about last week, Jeff, was just the coaching mismatch between Dan Campbell and Bill Belichick. I mean, that was on full display really through the entire game. I thought defensively, the Patriots, obviously, holding Detroit to 0 points, that schemed as well as any team has against the Lions, who, Amon-Ra St. Brown was on a bit of a pitch count. That certainly hurt. But that was not the difference between, 29-point loss. The Lions really couldn't run the ball as effectively as they had in weeks past. And to me, the biggest thing was, Jared Goff kind of turned back into a pumpkin in this game. I think he was really befuddled by a lot of the schemes that New England was throwing at him defensively. Had a bad pick, kind of near the red zone for Detroit. Once that happened, it kind of felt like this game was already over. But Ramondre Stevenson, 25 for 161 in this game, ripped off a 50-yarder. And for the second straight week, I mean, Bailey Zappi, he did throw a pick. He wasn't perfect, but more than capable of being a game manager.
Yep, absolutely. Damian Harris got hurt in this game. That was big for Stevenson. I don't think Harris is going to, judging by first reports, doesn't look like Harris is going to be good to go this week either. So could be a big game for Stevenson. There wasn't anybody else that stepped up. We'll see what happens if Harris is inactive. You definitely will have a third running back active this week. The Lions, they get a bye week at least to lick their wounds and literally get healthy there. Get DeAndre Swift back. I think that the lack of his dynamic really kind of came into play here. You're right about Goff. He had the big pick, and he also had the big fumble TD. So that was pretty huge. St. Brown, you mentioned, was on a pitch count. We'll see what happens if they, like, after the bye. Do they get Jameson Williams back? St. Brown will be at full speed, full capacity. How much of a different offense is this going to be? DJ Chark again didn't play, and they actually missed him. They were an average team, and when he played a better defense, a defense that's improving, as the case is with the Pats, that's what happens. And Pat's side, Jacoby Myers, huge dominant target share, 7 for 111, 8 targets. They didn't have to throw the ball that much, only won 21 throws. So that was nice. We saw nothing out of Devontae Parker. That's the one guy I was like, some weeks he does something and you're encouraged, and then other weeks he just disappears. This was a disappearance week. Nelson Aguilar had 1 target, disappeared as well. It was basically Myers or Henry. They got almost all the targets.
Yeah, you're right about that. And we talked on the XM show last week about who do you trust most in this receiving core, and I mean, we essentially settled on it being a week-to-week frustrating rotation. Nelson Aguilar had a fumble in this game. Was it ruled a fumble or a pick? I don't even know. I think it was ruled an interception. But he's having trouble hanging out of the ball. You do wonder what the confidence level is there. Finally, good to see Hunter Henry involved. I mean, still not to the point where you feel comfortable necessarily throwing him in a lineup based on how it's gone for the majority of the year, but he goes 4 for 54. Other than that, no major takeaways. I mean, like you said, you feel good about Ramondre Stevenson for the next week or two, kind of breaking the tie between he and Damian Harris. But the Lions, man, 1-4. They don't have the feel of a 1-4 team, right? There's been so much optimism around this team, and they're probably on pace to have about the same season as last year. With that said, 0 points this week. They're still the second highest scoring team in the league behind Buffalo. So that is quite the accomplishment. And likely by the end of tonight, the Chiefs will have passed them up. But still, I mean, to put up no points in week 5 and still be a top 5 scoring team in the league, it's impressive, if nothing else.
It is. It really is. Let's talk Saints and Seahawks. We talked about the Seahawks side of things. Let's talk about the Saints. Lots happening here. Starting with Taysom Hill. I mean, got to start the conversation with Taysom Hill. Monster day, 9 for 112 on the ground with a 60-yard touchdown run and a couple short ones. Also, threw for a touchdown. He's a tight end, but he's not a tight end. I have one of my leagues. We're having a little rules debate here, where there's an argument to try to remove his tight end eligibility. I get it because he's not really lining up as a tight end ever.
Yeah.
But you can't make midseason changes. Also,
no, you can't. You can't. So if you're in a league that allows that, that's a huge boon, right? I mean, if he's eligible at tight end, he's the tight end 2 right now. And again, Travis Kelce probably passes him up tonight, but that means he's going to be the tight end 3 through 5 weeks. And I mean, this was just kind of an all-time anomaly game. I mean, Taysom Hill I think he returned a kickoff in this game at one point. He was lining up at fullback at times. I mean, this was the full-on Taysom Hill experience. Obviously, you can't expect 4 touchdowns every single week, but I think they need him. Like, they absolutely needed every single piece of Taysom Hill to win this game and hang on against Seattle, because I mean, I don't know if Seattle just has this incredible offense under Geno Smith, or if the Saints defense isn't quite what we think it is, because the Saints covered a relatively big number. I think they closed as 5-point favorites at home. That one seemed a little fishy with all the points that Seattle's been able to put up, but they couldn't really get stops when they needed to. I mean, a lot of big plays for Seattle in this game, big passing plays, downfield to DK Metcalf, downfield to Tyler Lockett. Kenneth Walker had the long 69-yard run, just uncharacteristic by the New Orleans Saints defense. However, I mean, we could pretty firmly say at this point that I think that the Seahawks and the Lions are probably in the running for the worst defense in the league. I mean, this one felt like a Big 12 game.
Yeah, I still kick myself for not recognizing that potential last week between Seahawks and Lions, and like be all over it in DFS and things of that nature.
Yep.
Those who did really profited handsomely from that there. Fun little stat. Alvin Kamara does not have a touch inside the 10-yard line this year. Not one. Hate Taysom Hill because of that. But unless you and the thing is, only because I have Kamara in the stake league. Otherwise, I mean, I'd be thrilled about it because it's like, not my problem. Because early in drafts, I was fading him because of the potential for a suspension, but that's gone by the wayside. So that's not going to happen. But Kamara still got tons of production for you. But man, just this close to having that monster game. Remember, this is a guy that had 6 touchdowns in a game before. It's not that he's incapable of handling goal line work. They just don't let him have a chance.
No, exactly. Yeah, exactly right. And I mean, he was close to ripping off a couple bigger ones than he already had in this game. And it was a big time what if type of game for Alvin Kamara. But either way, good to see him running well again, because even early on in the season when he was in the lineup, didn't quite look like himself. But this was a really nice breakout game for Alvin Kamara, even though Taysom Hill, in some ways ends up vulturing 4 touchdowns for this offense. It does feel like they're at least somewhat back on track these last couple of weeks. I mean, for a while there, I mean, they barely scored against Tampa Bay. They had that really ugly game against the Panthers where they only put up 14, and then putting up 25 on Minnesota. I think that's fine. And then putting up 39 now on Seattle. And that sets up a really interesting game at home against the Cincinnati Bengals in week 6.
Yeah. Not only did they put up 39 points against Seattle. They put up 39 points against Seattle with Andy Dalton as their starting quarterback.
Yeah.
With no Michael Thomas, with no Jarvis Landry, with Chris Olave getting concussed. And we'll see what happens with him this week, because obviously the concussion protocol, everything's getting super scrutinized now. So you can't even assume that anybody's coming back in the following week. Question involving Olave. Do you trade Chris Olave and Terry McLaurin for DK and Devontae Smith? 2 receivers for 2 receivers. What's your take on this here?
I think that's a pretty fair deal. Metcalf especially has looked pretty good these last few weeks. And I think it looks like, for the most part, I think Seattle's going to be able to score. I think they're going to play in a lot of games that look like this one. I mean, against the truly elite defenses, I think that they probably still get shut down. You think to what we saw against San Francisco in week 2, but I still think I would want the DK side of that. I think McLaurin has been really quiet. That's probably the frustrating guy that you want to get rid of. And we'll see on Olave. I mean, this could be, like you said, with the way that there's kind of this heightened concern now about concussions. I mean, it's no longer, kind of a thing where you feel good about him playing the next week.
Yeah, I think this is actually relatively easy to go on the DK side for me. And my love for Olave is pure as mountain snow, but you may not have him this week. So I do that there. Another related trade question. Aaron Jones and Kenneth Walker for Jonathan Taylor, full point PPR. Which side do you prefer?
I want Jones and Walker
Yeah,
at
I
this
think
point.
easy decision. You got a banged up Taylor, a bad Indy offensive line.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt you. I know you were going to probably say something
I was going to say the exact same thing. You're right. I mean, it's not like Jonathan Taylor looked great before the injury. I mean,
right.
Yeah, at some point he's going to find his level, but it's entirely possible that he's just running behind a bad offensive line. Nobody's going to respect that passing game all year. I mean, especially now with Penny going down, I think that makes it all that much easier.
And reminder, Penny is out for the season, folks. So it's not even just a major injury. He's out for the season. I feel awful for Penny. He's going into free agency this offseason. It was his job to be the man. He had coming off a huge week the week before. Once again, he gets hurt. This is just a traumatic injury. It's not like a injury prone thing. Don't make it that. But it's just yet another log on that fire. It's tough. So I feel awful for him. Let's move on to Miami and the Jets. Oh my goodness. What Miami they lost Bridgewater right away. They laid an egg in this game. Yep. It was ugly. Skylar Thompson did his best to hang on, but I mean, he was put into a tough situation. You're on your third string QB. Yep. You're not really expecting him to play, and he was left to it there and struggled. 19 for 33, no touchdowns, an interception, sacked a couple of times. Lost a fumble even. This is a game that just kind of spiraled out of control for them in the fourth quarter. It's actually kind of close until the fourth quarter.
It was. And at first it kind of reminded me of last week's game against Cincinnati, where obviously you're much more limited under Skylar Thompson than you are going from Tua to Bridgewater. But, after Thompson came in, like he game managed a little bit, it's only 5-0 at the end of the first quarter. And, it kind of went back and forth for a little bit. Jets go up 12-0, but Miami's able to come back and score. And then Skylar Thompson, throws an interception. But even after that, this was still a 5-point game at the half. To me, the biggest swing point was Miami missing a field goal. I think it was midway through like the third quarter when it was a field goal that would have put them up 20-19. And after that, everything completely unraveled. They fumble on the next drive. They gave up 3 straight touchdown drives. And from then on, this one got completely out of hand, but kind of a cross-off game for Miami. I mean, losing your quarterback that early in the game and then having to turn to someone who really had no expectation of playing. It's really hard to get a gauge on what that truly means. So unfortunately, it kind of becomes a lost week for guys like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. I just don't think it's a fair evaluation.
Now, Tyreek Hill was in a walking boot after the game, so something to watch there for that injury-wise. I used Bridgewater in a super flex league. I used him over Geno Smith. So not big fat zero. I used him in DFS yesterday. So even though I had other things that were looking pretty good there, I had some other good I used Chubb in a smash spot and smash he did. And then it didn't matter because I got 0 from the quarterback there. Two quarterbacks in the concussion protocol for Miami, the team that's most under scrutiny here. We'll watch to see what this is, what's going to happen with them. Unfortunately, they don't get the bye week. This is a team that desperately needs the bye week, but they don't get it. Instead, they host Minnesota. So we'll see about that. Jet side of things, Breece Hall's taken over, although Michael Carter is the touchdown vulture. Who thought Michael Carter would be a touchdown vulture coming into the season? But here we are with 2 TDs from him and another sequence where he's in a red zone situation where Zach Wilson actually got the rushing touchdown. This was, you look at the stats for the Jets, and I'm kind of like, okay, fine. I mean, they put 40 points on the board, but they dealt with some short field because they didn't totally pile on the yards. But Wilson was very efficient when he did throw 2 long catch and runs by Breece Hall, too.
Yeah, this really wasn't as much of a beatdown as the score would indicate. Like you said, a lot of short fields, especially late in the game. I mean, the Jets scored 21 points in the fourth quarter. So this was not a game that was completely in control. Really until the end of it. But Breece Hall, to me, I mean, that's the biggest takeaway here, right? I mean, he's RB7 right now in PPR leagues, and he looks really, really good, really explosive. 18 for 97 and the touchdown, 2 catches, 100 yards. I mean, had the 79-yarder that nearly went for a score. Yeah, he's been as advertised, and I think he's maybe even been a little bit better than advertised on a day where Zach Wilson wasn't all that great. I mean, 14 of 21, no touchdowns, no picks, which is huge. I mean, when he's not turning the ball over, that really does a lot for the bottom line. But outside of Breece Hall and I guess Michael Carter, vulturing the 2 touchdowns, no one else really stood out on this Jets offense fantasy wise.
No, they didn't. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think the wide receivers, you have to be a little concerned that you're just not getting the volume. Wilson, Davis. I mean, Elijah Moore. I mean, I think I made a bold take when I was talking with you that I take Elijah Moore over someone that you were suggesting. And clearly, I don't even remember who the player was, but I was wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I was like trying to talk you into like the Jaguars' fifth receiver or something like that.
No,
I don't think it was like the biggest missed opportunity of all time. But yeah, I mean, the Elijah Moore thing, I'm glad I didn't buy in on him. I was scared to death of what this offense was going to look like under Zach Wilson, and I know there's a lot of optimism, based on how well these two connected at times last season. That okay, the return of Zach Wilson, now it's Elijah Moore time. That has not been the case, man. I mean, just 3 targets on 19 routes. That's not ideal. It does almost feel like the Jets are in a similar situation in New England where like Davis, Moore, and Garrett Wilson are all kind of on the same level. And one week, it's just going to be a matter of like, all right, who pulls down the 50-50 long ball, to kind of differentiate yourself away from the other 3. And the only other note I have on this Jets passing game, if you started Tyler Conklin, we've been pumping him up the last 2 weeks. You took a 0 here. 1 target on 7 routes, just a complete non-factor.
Yep. I think they're focusing on the running backs more. Breece Hall, I mean, he really is. And I think he's definitely in the, stardom. I actually benched him in a league, Nick. I had James Robinson, Damian Pierce at my running back spots, and I had Jalen Waddle at my flex. It's a 2-2-1 league, not a 2-3-1 league. And
it's tough.
I mean, man. Waddle against the Jets. I mean, I want that matchup. I need that matchup.
I think it comes down to Pierce versus Hall. And I mean, it worked out okay for you. Obviously, you would have rather have had Hall, but Pierce, I thought ran pretty well against the Jags. And, he's certainly passing the eye test as well. Those guys back to back right now in PPR rankings. Breece Hall 7th, Damian Pierce 8th. Yep.
And Robinson was a guy who was in my circle of trust with a great smash matchup. It's just what happened.
Yep, I'm with you. That was a no-brainer for me. That's the single biggest surprise of that game is that James Robinson couldn't get going.
Exactly. Are you buying low on Jalen Waddle this week or St. Brown the following week? Because St. Brown's on bye this week. Just remember that. Mm-hmm. But I need to see who's going to be the quarterback for the Dolphins. Actually, I mean, I think there's just so many layers of uncertainty there.
Yeah, and you're going up against the Vikings defense that I think is good enough that if it is Skylar Thompson, you just don't feel great about how that game is going to turn out. And, the weeks after that, though, get pretty interesting. And the Dolphins, you mentioned it, they need a bye so badly. They don't get their bye till week 11. Like, that's not coming anytime soon. So they're going to kind of have relief. They're just going to have to kind of close their eyes and get through this. But after this week, if you assume that at least one of Bridgewater or Tua is available, maybe let's say for week 7, then you got a nice little run. You get the Steelers, you get the Lions, you get the Bears, you get the Browns, and you get the Texans in 5 consecutive weeks. Those are all plus matchups for that passing game.
Yeah, for sure. Falcons, Bucks. Big penalty in this game. Huge penalty in this game. The Falcons, I mean, they were outclassed for 3 quarters. It was 21-0 going into the 4th. And the Bucks kind of took their foot off the gas a little bit. And then they got bailed out by that roughing the passer penalty.
That's the penalty of the year so far. I believe it was Jerome Boger on the call on that one. I mean, that was
Jerome Boger. I mean, say no more. It's terrible.
Right. Well, it felt like we got a bunch of those calls. Like, was it 2-3 seasons ago? I remember like there's a Clay Matthews one that kind of set everybody off. Maybe it was further back, but it seemed like the pandemic of like bad roughing the passer calls had subsided a little bit. Like we were being a little bit more reasonable as a society when it came to those. I mean, this was as bad as you'll ever see. You can make all these cases. Usually it's like, well, if the defender landed on top of him or if he threw him down, like none of that was in play here. This was just a completely routine sack, not the type of play. Because as fans, I think we've now been conditioned that on every sack, you're kind of holding your breath and saying like, please don't throw a flag. Please don't throw a flag. This one didn't even cross my mind. Like there was nothing about it that seemed malicious. And of course, that gifted the Buccaneers a first down and allowed them to essentially end this game. It really felt like Atlanta, if they got the ball back there, I don't know that they were for sure going to score, but I think they thought they were going to score. The way that they had moved the ball on their last 2 possessions, like you said, the Bucs offense just completely turtled up for most of the second half. It would have been really interesting. And I mentioned this in the same context as the Packers and the Vikings. It kind of felt like that type of game for Tampa, where what looked at one point like it was going to be a cruise control victory. Yeah, you get the win, you're 3-2, but you don't really have the greatest feeling in your stomach coming out of this game.
No, they haven't had the greatest feeling all season long.
No,
they haven't been firing on all cylinders. Brady got his yards again. 351, needed 52 attempts to do so. The one touchdown to Fournette. If you're a Fournette manager, you're pretty happy. Especially after last week's debacle. But, even then, even last week, he was still getting targets in the passing game. So you're still pretty happy about that. They did run a little bit more often here, but, other than Fournette, you're not really even all that happy about everything else. I mean, Mike Evans, he's fine. 4 for 81, Godwin 6 for 61. And they were missing other personnel. I guess Cade Otton was an interesting story with no Cameron Brate this week. Otton, the rookie, went 6 for 43, was on 7 targets. That's encouraging, even if he didn't turn it into a score or anything. I mean, nice to know that he's getting a little bit more trusted.
74 snaps in this game out of a possible 79 for Cade Otton. So this was not even a timeshare really between he and Kokiev and Kyle Rudolph. I mean, it was dominated by Cade Otton. So somebody to monitor, certainly. I mean, in this offense, we talk about it with offenses like the Bills, being this kind of minor player every now and then in an offense, you could be poised to have a week like this, especially if you're dominating that snap load. So definitely a guy to monitor over the next couple of weeks. But for me, I mean, Fournette is the biggest takeaway here. 10 for 83 through the air. Had a receiving touchdown as well. He's been really good. I mean, he's up there as the RB6 now, one of only 6 backs who've accumulated 90 fantasy points through 5 weeks. Yeah, absolutely. And I was kind of shying away from him. Kind of have some regrets on that one there a little bit there. Same here. The Atlanta side, not much to see here. I mean, they had the comeback late, but you look at the numbers and it's pretty ugly stuff. They were able to run the ball mostly with Mariota. The running backs themselves didn't do a whole lot there. Algier had 13 carries, Huntley 8. Neither did a whole lot in the offense there. They got the Mariota passing touchdown. And then Avery Williams got the goal line carry. They're just to kind of flummox anybody that went after Huntley or Algier. Huntley is almost a cut this week. I almost feel like I did land him in a couple of spots where I was going cheap. I'm glad I went cheap because the pickups that were more expensive didn't do much either this week. So, Mike Boone, maybe you're kind of encouraged by, but you're not really thrilled with that one either. You're not certain you can start any of these guys that we all picked up last week. Yeah, glad I stayed away from Algier. I mean, this was probably about the game you expected against this Buccaneers defense. And had he been the one to sneak into the end zone, fine, you feel justified. But yeah, of course, it's Avery Williams. 3 carries, one of those goes for a score. But in terms of snaps, Algier 39, Williams 17, Huntley 16. So yeah, I mean, I think Huntley is firmly in cut territory at this point, just based on that. Right. And again, this offense seems like do everything we can to prevent Mariota from trying to throw the ball that much. So, Zacchaeus had the touchdown, but 2 for 39. Drake London, 7 targets. You're kind of hoping to be a target monster with no Kyle Pitts in this game. That wasn't the case. They just don't want to throw the ball that much, and it's hard to do well in this offense. Yeah, but I mean, they're sitting at 2-3. They've won 2 games that you didn't necessarily expect them to win. They hung in there with the Rams. They lost to the Saints by 1. I mean, their 3 losses have come by a combined 11 points on the year. So I mean, they've given those major constraints. So we should also mention, not that it matters, but they didn't have Kyle Pitts in this game. That didn't really affect anything. But I mean, they're a convincing 2-3. I mean, they're a fun team to watch, even though they have these limitations. I think they've adapted well. Yeah, I think so too. Before we get into the afternoon games, a quick note from Monkey Knife Fight. Football is officially back on Monkey Knife Fight with all the NFL action that you're looking for. And if college football is more your speed, they've got plenty of that too. On Monkey Knife Fight, there's no sharks, no salary caps, and no math. It's just easy to play, easy to win, daily fantasy player props. Join now at monkeyknifefight.com and you'll get your first game free. Then use promo code RWNFL to get your first deposit matched instantly up to $100. So what are you waiting for? Join Monkey Knife Fight today. Big thanks to Monkey Knife Fight for their sponsorship there. All right, Niners, Panthers. The game, they got Matt Rhule fired. Well, the final straw, I guess. They got Matt Rhule fired. This game was never really that close. The Niners, I mean, they could have. I mean, the Niners actually left some points on the field early on in this game too. Ended up smashing it. We got, Jeff Wilson had a big game. Tevin Coleman made a couple of appearances, got in the end zone twice, once catching, once running.
I think he's firmly ensconced as the number 2, and there's number 2 does matter in the Niners running game.
Mhm.
They don't want to have a total workhorse back. Not much else from the Niners side except Emmanuel Mosley out for the season with that injury late.
Yeah, I mean, George Kittle lost a fumble in this game. That was pretty discouraging. Did have 5 for 47, but yeah, just I don't know. It feels like the Kittle of old is he's just almost in like a different role at this point. You do think that breakout could be coming, but haven't been a lot of signs of that quite yet. So
it's
not
more like an
super
old Kittle instead of a Kittle of old.
Yeah, exactly. It's just been a little weird. I don't know. You just don't the way that they're using him just doesn't imply that he's like 1 week away from a breakout. It kind of just seems like they're okay with this. But yeah, not a lot else to take from this one. Debo found his way into the end zone as he always does. But Jeff Wilson, certainly looked the part of a number 1 back. Part of it is this Carolina defense, that's for sure. But he was really impressive, ran well in this game. And, a lot of the yardage that we saw Baker Mayfield put up in this game. And by the way, we got a PJ Walker appearance at the end of this thing. And it sounds like PJ Walker will likely start next week, given the injury to Baker Mayfield. So that's PJ Walker at the LA Rams, which honestly, at this point, I'm way more intrigued by the PJ Walker Panthers going up against the Rams than I are with Mayfield. I think we've pretty much seen what we need to see at this point.
Sad but true. I mean, the Carolina offense is just stifling, though. I mean, how much of this is it the coordinator, or is it just that they don't have the personnel, or is it the quarterback? Is it just the quarterback, or is there just the play calling is just bad too? I don't know. Matt Corral's already on injured reserve. Sam Darnold's hurt. I mean, it's going to be PJ Walker and Jacob Eason next week for the Panthers.
Yeah, you got to love this spot. I think if you're the Rams, you obviously in dire need of a win, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. But yeah, catching the Panthers in this spot coming off of the coaching change, I think is a pretty good spot for them. And Steve Wilkes is going to step in for now. So at least a guy with coaching experience. You're not just passing the sticks to somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. So maybe we see a more consistent effort from the Panthers. I will say, you mentioned the 49ers left some points on the board in this game, which they absolutely did. They had a field goal blocked. They settled for a field goal earlier in the first half on the drive that should have been a touchdown. They had the Kittle fumble. This was a 10-3 game. The Panthers had just blocked that field goal. And at that point, you're thinking, okay, we're at home. Maybe we could pull something off here. Baker Mayfield immediately throws a pick 6. And it felt like the game was just over at that point.
Yeah, it did. It really did. Yeah, 17-3 seems just that way more imposing. And it just seems like, okay, we're getting smashed again.
Yep.
McCaffrey wasn't efficient, but he got his, that's for sure. 14 for 54 and a touchdown. More importantly, 7 for 50 in the passing game. In a PPR league, it's another 25-point game, basically.
Yeah, it was ugly. That's for sure. A lot of that work came in garbage time. I mean, the Panthers were just airing the ball out their last couple of touches, which as you should, whatever. But yeah, not an efficient day, like you said, on the ground, but he's just going to keep finding his way. I think he's essentially team proof. Someone like Najee Harris, you just can't necessarily trust him to get these kind of numbers on a bad offense. McCaffrey's situation has been just as bad, and yet he always finds a way.
He does. He absolutely does. Terrace Marshall actually saw the field. We have a Terrace Marshall signing. I still believe in him, but maybe I believe in the historical him. And maybe, that's the problem. Any other takes from that game?
Absolutely not. Let's move it along.
Roll on. Cowboys, Rams. More excitement here. Rams, man, they're just so bad. They're terrible.
Yeah, this was, we talked about this as being a spot where, Dallas seems to always catch whatever team has the worst offensive line the previous week. They seem to play the Cowboys the next week. And yeah, this was awful, man. I mean, Matthew Stafford sacked 5 times, another week where he ends up with 1 interception, could have had more. The yardage ends up looking okay, 28 for 42. This is a game where they essentially had to pass every down in the second half, could not get anything going on the ground between Cam Akers. And really that was it. I mean, we didn't see Darrell Henderson log a single carry in this game. Other than Cooper Kupp just continuing to be Cooper Kupp, and even when the offense looks awful, still you look up and he's got 7 for 125 and a score. Other than that, they finally got Tutu Atwell involved. I mean, it was only 1 catch, but it was a long one, and it felt like a big one at the time. Beyond that, man, it's the Rams are in trouble, and they're one of those teams that they have the infrastructure. You kind of have to give them the benefit of the doubt, but this is really, really ugly.
Yeah, the Allen Robinson farce continues. Abandon all hope, ye who enters here. Is he a cut for you at this point, Nick?
It's getting there, right? I mean, 3 for 12. At least he was targeted 5 times in this game, but there's just like the way that they're like trying to use him almost feels like pathetic or forced. Like there's kind of a little bit more severe version of what I said with Kittle, where you don't watch these games and think, man, next week, if that play had just gone differently, he would have had a huge game. It's like he disappears for
Yeah.
entire quarters. Like you totally forget about Allen Robinson. And yeah, I mean, if you have another receiver or, maybe you had like Rashad Penny or something and you need to clear a spot to pick up another running back, sure. I don't think it's beyond question to drop Allen Robinson. I think given the level of investment, you want to hold off on that as long as you can. But at this point, I mean, he's not a start. I don't know if I would be cutting him quite yet, but I'm not starting him.
Yeah. I'm not either. I mean, the Rams just don't have time. 5 sacks in this game again. No running game at all. This offensive line's just kind of in trash mode right now. The Cowboys, I mean, they ran the ball well. Pollard had that big run. Zeke was 27 for 78. That's really not that great. But it's a lot of runs, 34 runs. They only had 16 passing attempts in this game. I mean, they shut it down. They knew that the Rams couldn't move the ball against them. And they didn't really want to expose Cooper Rush that much. Got sacked 3 times. And so he had 19 dropbacks, I guess. Yeah. So, if you're a CD Lamb or Michael Gallup guy, you were not happy. But, next week against the Eagles is probably going to be different in terms of like what they need to do offensively. They just didn't need to score. They knew the Rams were never going to score against them.
Yeah, when they started this game off by returning a Matthew Stafford fumble for a touchdown, that's DeMarcus Lawrence. I mean, that was on like the 3rd or 4th play of the game.
Yeah.
So already, they missed the extra point. So already, or it's a 2-point conversion. Sorry. Already you're up 6-0, and then you then force another punt by the Rams, and that one's blocked, and you get another field goal there. So Dallas, spotted itself a 2-score lead to begin the game, and it felt like they were just able to ride that the entire rest of the afternoon. I mean, at no point did you ever really feel like the Rams were going to take control of this game. And then, of course, late Matthew Stafford has the back-breaking interception. It looked like he was targeting Allen Robinson on that play. It was a 3rd down. It was semi-desperation mode, but that just felt like the final knife twist on what was a really, really ugly day for Stafford again.
Indeed. Dallas faces Philly next. Philly went on the road, didn't play their best, but it did enough to win against the Arizona. Remain undefeated, the lone undefeated team in the NFL. Now 5-0. I mean, but unfortunately for them, Dallas is 4-1. They thought that maybe we could pull away all these divisional odds, and the Giants are 4-1 too, for that matter too. So the NFC East, who knew?
Yeah, kind of a tough break for Philly to have this start and really have no cushion in their own division. That's for sure. Right. I mean, I'm still pretty convinced that the Giants are going to fall back at some point, but they're going to be in the mix. When you start 4-1, you really need to collapse to kind of push yourself out of that playoff picture. And Dallas, we'll see if Dak comes back this week. That seems like far from a guarantee, probably close to a 50-50. They're saying he needs a full week of practice, but if you're Dallas, I think you feel okay, at least, about throwing Cooper Rush out there. I mean, he's still undefeated as the starter. I think this was probably his worst game since taking over, his most limited game. And still, the big thing with Cooper Rush is he's not going to kill you with turnovers. He makes smart plays. He had a big drop by CeeDee Lamb in the first half of this game that would have changed things as well. That killed a big drive for Dallas. So maybe the numbers could have looked a little better. But yeah, I mean, this is an interesting spot for Dallas because for the first time, it doesn't feel like they're catching an opponent at the right time. I mean, you're playing the hottest team in football. So this will be a big time test for Dallas, whether it's Dak or whether it's Cooper Rush.
Yeah. Sunday night game here. So the Eagles, I mean, Jalen Hurts, this was his least productive passing game, maybe 239 yards, no touchdowns, at least no picks. Did have the 2 rushing touchdowns and 61 rushing yards. So still a very good fantasy day. Again, though, this is continuing a trend where they were a lot more productive offensively in the first half than they were in the second. Only 6 points in the second half. Their defense had to carry the load against Arizona, who was limited to 17 points.
Yeah, they had some bad penalties in this game. There was one drive, I think it was the first drive of the second half, where Philly marched all the way down the field. They got a 1st and 10 at the 15, and you end up taking a 42-yard field goal out of that drive. So they left some opportunities on the table, and it feels like Arizona does this every week. They fall behind, and then they just reel off these long drives in the second half. I mean, Arizona only had 3 possessions in the second half, and Philly only had 3. So part of the lack of scoring is, I mean, Philly scored on 2 of its 3 drives in the second half.
It's
and
true.
and still only put up 6 points just because one of those drives was 17 plays, the other was 10, and Arizona has drives of 9, 12, and 10 plays.
Yeah. Arizona had a drive to start the third quarter. Their first drive of the third quarter. They went 9 plays for 10 yards somehow, and used up 5:22. Talk about just a waste there. Obviously they had some penalty issues there and all that, but and a sack on the before having to punt it away, and that was just kind of their symbolic of their day, though.
Yeah, well, they had the weirdest play, or one of the weirdest plays of the year. At the end of the game, I think there was some confusion as to which down it was. Kyler Murray scrambled for what I think he thought was a first down. And, I read afterwards that in the stadium, like the display in the stadium had said that it was a first down.
Right.
So I think the idea is that Kyler slid to the ground thinking he had the first down, saw 1st and 10 on the video board, ran up to spike it, didn't realize that it was actually 3rd down. And of course, by that point, they couldn't challenge the spot. It was close, although to me, the ball is down like where the quarterback begins his slide. He was clearly behind the first down line. So I think that call was correct. But obviously an error in judgment there. They have to kick a slightly longer field goal than they would have wanted to. Matt Amendola, of course, just dramatically misses. Wasn't even close, wide right.
This is the second game that Amendola has cost a team too, by the way. Backup kicker has cost 2 teams a game.
Yep, exactly. 2 different teams. I mean, insane. But this is a 43-yarder. I mean, very makeable. I don't think the Kyler mistake was really as damaging as people made it out to be. But this is a game that should have gone into overtime for sure. I think 8 or 9 times out of 10 that field goal is made.
Yeah. Almost could say that the scoreboard operator cost the Cardinals the game just as much because he was relying on that. I mean, but wow. Yeah, brutal. Yep. And that's so wild. And they thought, all of a sudden they're out of timeout. So it's end of the game after that. So I mean, the thing is, that's it. You hate seeing the spike anyhow. But there you go. Yep. Run the play. James Conner got hurt in this game. He was looking good before the rib injury there. He was 9 for 55. Yeah. Running pretty well. Had 1 catch only, but Eno Benjamin now might be a guy this week against Seattle. This is a matchup we want.
I was almost hoping this wouldn't come up, so we wouldn't get the word out on this. Although, most good fantasy players are going to be all over this. I think Eno Benjamin is going to be the dude I'm paying up for this week, especially in leagues where I have Rashad Penny. I thought he ran really well. I mean, tacked on a touchdown, an important touchdown in the second half of this game. Another guy for me who really passes the eye test. He runs really physically. A little bit, James Conner's a little bit more shifty of a guy. Benjamin, not afraid to plow through you. So I was impressed by what I saw from him. I mean, the numbers aren't anything crazy, but if he could hang on to an RB1 role for a week or two, a lot of potential there. And then my only other note, Rondale Moore looked great in this game, 7 for 68, looked really, really shifty, had a couple of long runs after the catch. And then Hollywood Brown just continuing to find ways, man. 8 for 78 and a touchdown. Did not have Hollywood Brown pegged as a top 5 receiver in PPR through 5 weeks, but here we are, and
but it makes sense though too.
It does. I just, I mean, the connection with him and Kyler in the past, I think maybe I didn't put enough into that. We'll see though. We're 1 week away, I guess, from DeAndre Hopkins being back in the mix.
That's true. Benjamin roster in only 11% of Yahoo leagues, so he's Walker's probably not available in a lot of places, but Benjamin definitely is. So something to watch for there. All right. Any other notes from this week before we sign off? What do you think about tonight's game?
Looking forward to tonight's game. I think it's a good spot for the Chiefs, of course. I mean, they blew out the Raiders, in huge fashion, each of their matchups last week. I think they're kind of clicking again after that letdown against the Colts. But yeah, I mean, we'll see what the Raiders could do here. I mean, they're a good enough team that I don't think this should be a blowout by any means. It kind of feels like it's trending in that direction. I mean, we got a spread of at least a touchdown in this game, but Hunter Renfrow back in the mix. Darren Waller, we need to see a little bit more from him, I think, to start feeling good about that level of investment. He was a full participant this week in practice, moving in the right direction. I hope we get a good game here. I hope it's not just a runaway win for KC.
I have a feeling it's going to be a runaway win, but that might be, I might be biased as far as like seeing what's happened in recent matchups against them. So we'll see. All right, guys. Thanks everybody for the comments and questions in the forum. Thanks for listening. If you're listening later, but thanks for jumping in the live stream. Otherwise, you can catch Nick and I tonight on SiriusXM Fantasy during the Monday night game. It's the Whalen cast, we'll call it. So join in 8 to 10 Eastern time. Thanks everybody for listening. Take care.